With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live. Navigating through the minefield of misinformation, intelligence operations, predictive programming. This is Connecting the Dots with Matt Ehret on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
All right, welcome for the second hour of Connecting the Dots. I am your host, Matt Ehret, and we will be joined today for our second guest, a figure who I've admired for many, many years. I'm proud to call my friend, Professor Michel Chossudovsky, who, honestly, if I chose to read his biography in full right now, we wouldn't have a show. It could fill up the entire 1 hour segment. So, to be brief, if people don't know Professor Chossudovsky, get out from under the rock that you've been living in. Go to globalresearch.ca is a fantastic resource that everybody should be using on a daily basis. He's the director of the Center for Research on Globalization, a professor emeritus at the University of Ottawa. He's worked around the world. He has advised governments. He's befriended Fidel Castro and interviewed him. He has advised or spoken to in a friendly term Mahathir Mohamad and many other things throughout the course of a very, very rich multi-decadal career. And I'm very, very happy today to discuss some breaking events and some history. So, Michel, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm delighted to be on the program, and I value hospitality and commitment also to analysis and truth, which is really which is much needed at this particular juncture. In perhaps what we are living is now the most serious crisis in world history, most serious economic, social crisis in world history, very complex. And it also requires a historical background. But what's happening in Palestine is interconnected with what's happening in other parts of the world, and it's based on power structures and so on and so forth. The best thing you asked me, the question.
That's great. Yeah. No, and every generation we often hear, everybody kind of thinks that we're the center of the world, and we always hear this is the most important. I think at almost every moment in human history, there are a lot of people who think, wow, this is the most important time in history. However, I do believe, as you just alluded to, that there is something very specific about our moment, which is not tied to ego, but that is tied to very objective metrics, the systemic crisis, the breakdown of the system. A lot of very very big forces are at play, and that are culminating now at a bifurcation point, for good or for bad. However, that this turns out the future is underdetermined. So I do think that this is very real, and the point of Israel, Palestine, Gaza is one of those spark plugs. So I am glad that you brought this up, because I do want to start the conversation. Just recently, the International Court of Justice heard cases from South Africa, and which were endorsed by many nations of the world, trying to make the case that, look, a genocide is happening. We need to do something, force some form of policy to stop this genocide, which has already killed upwards, they speculate, above 30,000 people, most of them civilians, children, women. What we've seen in response has been no respect by the forces leading Israel currently. And in fact, as of today, we've seen an increased danger of an imminent invasion of Rafah. The defunding of the UNRWA, which has provided core relief that's kept people alive, that is being cut off now by Benjamin Netanyahu's regime. What is your take on that situation currently?
Well, first of all, I don't think we have to applaud the decisions of the International Court of Justice. That court is criminalized. And by that, I'd like to simply mention, I've looked at the legal clauses, but the decision of the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, is a request to the state of Israel to prevent and punish genocide or acts of genocide. It's very explicit. And then it refers to the convention, the Genocide Convention. But the problem is that it is the state of Israel, represented by the Netanyahu government, which is leading this genocide, and they are requesting the Netanyahu government to prevent and punish. Now, one has to look at the legal terms. I must say, I've looked through the statements, but in essence, that decision is a green light, as you'd say in French, carte blanche, to the Netanyahu government to continue what it's doing. So people have to understand that they've turned it upside down. They've given the authority to the state of Israel to prevent and punish, when in fact they should be punished. Okay? Now, the second issue has to do, and I've written on that extensively. It's also on my Substack. The other dimension is the false flag. Okay? Now, people will say, oh, we don't want to deal with false flags. There's a history of false flags that goes back at least 20 years. I've documented that very carefully. Okay? It was justified vengeance, and then they even had other terms for it. And essentially, a false flag is ensuring the casualties on the Israeli side, deaths on the Israeli side, and then use that as a pretext to justify an invasion, which was prepared well in advance. And I should mention another thing: the United States is behind this process. This is a joint Israeli-US operation. And that, of course, has a bearing on the International Court of Justice, because the president of the court is a former, she was with the State Department under Hillary Clinton as a legal advisor. She takes her orders from Washington. And in other words, it's what you call it, quite obviously in legal terms, is it's a conflict of interest. She's in the conflict.
For those who may not believe that, Google Joanne Donahue, and exactly what Michel Chossudovsky just said. You will be able to verify yourself. This was a legal advisor to Hillary Clinton, the woman who oversaw the destruction of Libya and the bragging about killing Gaddafi and so much more. That person is the president of the International Court of Justice. So, yeah, thank you. I don't want to derail you, but continue, please.
No, but I mean, there's another thing. The South African, the Republic of South Africa did not raise the issue of U.S. involvement, and for obvious reasons. I think that's something we can accept. But the fact is that Israel doesn't operate a project of this magnitude without coordinating with its counterparts, both military as well as intelligence and so on. That is absolutely clear. But now, if you look at the reports of the New York Times, authoritative reports, they acknowledge that first of all, the Hamas so-called invasion, which was part of this false flag, it was known to the Israeli military and intelligence apparatus at least a year ahead of time. Okay, they knew what was going on, and they are part of it. And we know what false flags are historically. But I must say that the idea of a false flag is to trigger deaths of Israeli deaths to provide the Israeli government with a pretext and a justification to go ahead and wage the genocide. So there we are, and all of this is known and documented, but the false flag should have been raised in the procedure of South Africa. I'm not criticizing them for doing it, but now we as analysts, we have to review it.
Yeah,
And we also know that there was a very detailed plan to wage the genocide, which was formulated ahead of time.
Could you speak to that a little bit as far as some of the most persuasive facts that you have encountered that demonstrate that this was, as you say, and as I believe as well, I've looked at some of the facts, a false flag that was premeditated before October the 7th? What are the most persuasive things that really surprised you and have brought you to that conclusion?
Well, first of all, we can simply, I've tried to go through this very carefully. First of all, there's a historical background of false flags going back to the 90s, okay? And they're well documented, and they don't hide it. They say, well, we're going to wage this once Israelis start getting killed, okay? Now, the thing is that it is so well documented, and we have witnesses from the Israeli Defense Force. We have statements by Netanyahu. I don't have them in front of me, but he essentially says, we must give money to Hamas. He says it.
Yes.
He says it. We must give money to Hamas but they're not giving money to the civilian arm of Hamas. They're giving money to specific
militant
individuals who are intelligence assets. It's
and here we're referring to, I would imagine we're referring to many of those billionaires who are based in Qatar, who are sort of the nominal heads overseeing the administration of the worst elements of Hamas, is what you're referring to, or other things as well?
I mean, these intelligence operations are very, very complex.
Yes.
Essentially, these are intelligence assets. They've infiltrated, I mean, in the same way as the United States has Al-Qaeda. Well, Al-Qaeda is a creation of U.S. intelligence. We know that.
Right.
Nobody denies it. But so that Hamas has a civilian arm, and I think we respect Hamas as an entity, but there are elements within Hamas who are complicit in this agenda, and Egypt is also involved. Now that is my last text, which is at Global Research Now, but I think we also have to look at the broader perspective of this Middle East war, because this is not an agenda which is confined to Palestine. And at the same time, we have to reflect on the fact that maybe genocide is becoming the new normal. It's something which is being accepted. Well, it's been accepted by our leaders, by our governments, ultimately. If there are hesitations, it's because there's a grassroots solidarity movement against these acts of these atrocities. But I mean, we have to reveal the lies, and we have to reveal the criminality of the judicial system. Nobody wants to talk about that, okay? And we know that judicial system is corrupt. And we know it also because if you look at how they formulate acts of criminality in relation to the enemies of the United States of America, let's say Putin was accused of kidnapping children from the Donbass region, and these children are now they have an education. He saved them. Okay.
Yeah.
He brought them to and it's well documented. They're there. They're in college, and they're going to get education, and their relatives, the families left as well, but some of them have stayed on, and they're involved in the battle and so on. But that really gets me into the other arm of what's going on in the world. And I said, as I said, now we're looking at several war theaters, which are we have the Eastern European war theater with Ukraine. We have the Middle East war and the main target is Iran, and that's for obvious reasons. Iran is the largest, has the large reserves of oil and natural gas worldwide, and it is a strategic location, and this is really what is the driving force. It's the confiscation of wealth of countries which produce oil, and of course the Middle East. I was once asked at a conference in Montreal because this issue of Iraq-Iran, which was formulated in the 90s, first Iraq, then Iran. It's part of a it's part of military.
There's a planned array of nations to go through regime change on a list that has been made public. Anyone can just look at the clean break doctrine for a strategy for securing the realm. It's public. People can read it and see exactly what the neocon grouping was preparing to do. They said it, and then they did it. From Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iran was high up on that list as the epitome to get to that objective, and you could see it. You're not speaking hyperbole at all. And I would like to we're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna listen to a couple of ads, and we're gonna come right back on TNTRadio.live to continue this conversation.
TNT's Timothy Shea.
The race is essentially now Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley. Ron DeSantis will be pulling his hat from the ring next. And the issue, as always, is why is the Nikki taking so much of the left's money? Well, maybe this will give you a little insight. She credits Hillary Clinton with inspiring her to enter politics, having attended a women's leadership summit at which Hillary spoke. And Nikki said, and I quote, "I then had to decide whether I was a Republican or Democrat." See, Nikki has no core beliefs other than doing whatever her globalist masters, paymasters, want her to say.
The Reckoning with Timothy Shea on today's News Talk, TNT.
When you can point me to an industry, to a platform that reaches 250 million people a month, virtually 9 out of 10 Americans, that's real, that's substantive, that's important. And that reach and that touch point and that daily reinforcement, it's an amazing place to be able to communicate messages. That's massive.
To find out more, go to TNTRadio.live.
Plug in.
Website
TNTRadio.live.
Check it out.
Today's News Talk Radio.
It's the coolest.
TNT.
All right, welcome back to the second segment of the second hour on Connecting the Dots on TNT Radio. With me is Professor Michel Chossudovsky, and we've been going through some of the developments and the insanity, the insidiousness of inside jobs, false flags, and specifically the drive to blow up Iran, which is a long-time objective by certain factions within the establishment that really... It strikes me as completely insane. Like, by doing this, it doesn't seem like it will benefit even those in Israel, in Washington, in Brussels, or in London, maybe, who are facilitating this or advancing this. It would just, in my mind, create a world of hyper instability. It would definitely make the world that the Israelis are living in much more unstable and dangerous. It would probably put the entire Arab world at the throat of the Israelis living in that area, as well as the United States more generally. So what do you think is the calculus or the logic, if you want to call it that, for those who have been pushing this?
Well, the United States of America has a hegemonic project which goes back in history, and it's the conquest. And it's also the recolonization of a number of countries, and it's ongoing, and we've seen it ongoing in the Middle East for the last well, it's more than 10 years now. I was in Syria just before it happened, and I saw it happen. And Iran has been on the drawing board of the Pentagon since 1995 formally. Now, when the U.S. Central Command, which is the regional command in the Middle East of the United States, and they brought out a report saying, first Iraq, then Iran. And it was very clear that this was a plan of conquest. And all those wars have an economic objective. In other words, we've lived through religious wars, but every single religious war is an economic war. It's to confiscate the assets and the resources of countries. And in the case of Iran, we're talking about natural gas, where they have something of the order of 24% of the reserves of natural gas worldwide. They're the major petroleum country and power, and so on. In other words, it's really to acquire that wealth of Iran, okay. and that is the objective. It's the economic process which is there for. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Right. No, that's good. No, and I just to remind people that we are in this logic of brute force, might makes right as an ethos is really something which has caused centuries, or if not millennia, of destruction and wars, and it's painful to listen to those who are promoting this bloodshed as being the virtue signalers, trying to sell themselves as though we here in the collective rules-based international democratic order West are the free society of democracy against the authoritarians. And recently Tucker Carlson did something with Putin a couple of days ago, which is, I think, a useful thing overall to give people a sense of what is Putin actually saying in an unbroken line of thought, for rather than just having things clipped out and given new context by a Mockingbird analyst. A lot of history was brought in, and one of the things that struck me was this deeper historical arc that was part of Putin's analysis of what is shaping the world. Why is this military intervention underway in Ukraine? And also what struck me while I was listening to that, and I know you're a wonderful historian, it was the hypocrisy that you have Tucker representing a voice, trying to pass himself off as the benevolent or a representative of the benevolent Western Empire, which the world knows, and much better than what China could be or something. And yet he's overseeing a nation which has taken Puerto Rico, Hawaii, California, New Mexico, and overthrown something like 200 plus elected heads of state over the past 80 years in the world under CIA regime change, and it's still underway. So the hypocrisy was loud, and I remember I was reading something by you where you point out that there was actually a U.S. invasion of Russia that a lot of people have not really thought about too deeply. Could you say something about that and how that factors in?
I looked through I looked at the interview. I would say I would give credit to Tucker Carlson, at least for having undertaken this initiative, and it I think it creates dialogue, and ultimately what Putin put forth, he didn't put forth some very important things. Now that's where it comes in, okay? And I want to stress the 7th of November 1917 is what is called the October Revolution. Well, they have a difference in calendars, but it was, in our calendar, it was the 7th of November. Now that was overthrowing, well, it was essentially overthrowing an existing transitional government, but it was also overthrowing the Tsarist regime and establishing so-called communist. Well, it wasn't even a communist agenda right from the start. But what happened, and this is not in the history books, that within about 2 months after the 7th of November, on the 20th, on the 12th of January, 1918, a NATO-style war involving 10 countries was led into invading the Soviet Union, or at least, well, it was not called the Soviet Union at the time. It was called Soviet Russia, and so on and so forth. But in any event, that war took place, started on the 12th of January. In other words, about 2 months after November 7. And it lasted for about 2 years, and there were 200,000 troops. 200,000 troops were involved in that war. And essentially it was there to literally to destabilize the Soviet project. Now, so that is one element. Now, I get into the second. I'll give you a very brief chronology. The second element is the onslaught of World War II. And I should mention that Adolf Hitler's election campaign was funded by Wall Street. Okay? And we have a lot of literature on that, but it was an initiative of both the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, and there were meetings, and in other words, it was a regime change. Adolf Hitler led what was called a National Socialist government, Nationalsozialistische Partei Deutschland, and the Dulles brothers were present at the meeting, and the Federal Reserve had representatives, etc. And they said, we're going to help you. And now, and I recall that very clearly. The first thing, I don't want to simplify very complex historical processes, but there is a sort of relationship between neoliberalism and Nazism. The first thing that was initiated by the government of Adolf Hitler was the privatization of the railways. Okay, and at the same time there was a very vast amount of U.S. interest there, but the main issue there, and I must insist on that, World War II would not have taken place, and particularly the Operation Barbarossa, without the shipments of oil by Standard Oil of New Jersey to the Nazi government from its inception right until 1945. You don't wage a war on the Soviet Union without petrol. And they didn't have it. They had some in Romania. They didn't have access to oil. And this has been amply documented by historians. Jacques Pauwels had brought out a book on this. And the fact is that there were other factors. There were certainly complicities also by the Bush family, which have been documented, and there were joint investments and so on. I don't want to get into that, but very simply, people understand that the invasion of the Soviet Union required petrol to go on with the tanks and armored cars. It was conventional warfare, and they were provided by the United States of America. Now, that is something which is historical. Now, let me move forward to the early war period. We had Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first use of nuclear weapons. We had the Manhattan Project, which was initiated in 1939 with the participation of Britain and Canada for the development of atomic bomb. And then we had the 2 atomic bombs launched respectively on the 6th and the 9th of 8th or 9th, yeah, I think it was the 8th, depends on the timeline, on these 2 cities. And then we had, and nobody knows this, that on the 15th of September, which is slightly more than a month after Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the War Department of the United States of America issues these are classified documents, but you read them 30 years later. But what was revealed was, first of all, to bomb 66 urban areas of the Soviet Union with more than 200 atomic bombs. And it was formulated on the 15th of September, 1945, when the 2 countries were allies. Okay?
Wow. And this is around the time that the OSS is being disbanded, right? And they're preparing the groundwork for a reorganized American intelligence agency as well.
The OSS was disbanded. Was really disbanded after the Vietnam War. Okay.
I meant because before the CIA, you had the OSS in September. I think it was in September around that same time that they were disbanding that, and Dulles and others were reorganizing it at that same moment to prepare the groundwork for the CIA to be brought online in 47. But yeah, that's interesting. They were calling for bombing the Soviet Union while they were still allies. I didn't know that.
But more than that, if you look at the documents, we've published this now, and they're declassified documents. You can't simply refute it. You can't say, "Oh no, that's an opinion." No, it's not an opinion. Okay, the same way as the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1918 on the 12th of. We have the U.S. and Allied troops in Vladivostok in tonight. We've got all those documents. But what is very serious here is that the nuclear issue, that the Manhattan Project was intended not to be used against Nazi Germany, and there's evidence to that effect, but to be used against the Soviet Union. We've got all the documents, and we even have the correspondence between Oppenheimer and the commanding officers and so on and so forth. And they said, we're going to use the dress rehearsal was these 2 Japanese cities, because they quote them in the document saying, well, we killed so many people and what kind of weapon systems and deployment must we plan? And for big cities, it was 6 bombs. Let's say for Moscow and Leningrad, that was the name of St. Petersburg at the time. It was 6 atomic bombs, and for smaller cities like Rostov-on-the-Don, it might be 2. It's all there. It's all for people to see. So, who initiated the arms race? It was the United States of America, because nobody would have gone in and developed nuclear weapons had it not been for the threat formulated on the 15th of September. In fact, it was formulated much earlier, but it was officially in the documents. We have it for 1945, 15th of September, 1945. I can't be more precise than that. But bear in mind, there was another war against against the Soviet Union, which was not implemented, and it was contiguous with the Manhattan Project's plan to bomb the Soviet Union. It was Winston Churchill who said Operation Unthinkable. Now that was a secret attack against the Soviet Union, formulated by Winston Churchill in the wake of the Yalta Conference. It was the Allies didn't think that they would be able to do it, but they were. That was even before the end of World War II. It was scrapped in 1945. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say a quick word on that too before we go for a quick break. Is that an element of Operation Unthinkable was continued in the form of Operation Gladio and NATO's secret armies that utilized. As part of the logic was, okay, well, we can use these different fascists as part of a secret shadow army that would carry out guerrilla warfare against the communists. Now, part of the invasion aspect that was shelved, but the other part of that plan was kept in motion. And that did create a vast, well, people can just Google Operation Gladio and have your mind blown if that hasn't meant anything to you yet. That being said, we're going to continue this exposition of history regarding what seems like a centennial, if not longer, agenda to destroy Russia. With Michel Chossudovsky, and I'm Matt Ehret on TNT Radio. We're going to come back in a couple of seconds.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
Well, the latest in the Michael Mann versus Mark Steyn trial is a little bit interesting, and I'm trying to figure out if this is right. Apparently, Dr. Mann's lawyers, there are 4 of them, and remember, Mark Steyn is defending himself by himself. Apparently, they've asked for a nominal fee as far as damages go, and there is a rumor that what was asked for, now sit down, you ready for this? Was $1. Now, Mark Steyn has spent around $3.5 million, I've heard. I don't know, maybe it's more, maybe it's less, defending himself from Michael Mann and Michael Mann's lawsuit over the fact that Mark Steyn thinks that Michael Mann hid the data and he called him a fraud. Right? Now, I could see, for instance, let's say the #1 climatologist in the world said that to you. That's one thing. But Mark Steyn is a journalist. That's the first thing. Second thing is, he had to raise the money to defend himself. And we've gone over this. But $1? Why would Michael Mann only want $1? You know why? He just wants the decision. He just wants to be able to say, see, he actually did defame me. I won the court case. Well, I don't think Steyn wants any part of that because of the fact that he wants to drill it home that what Michael Mann did, take 2 samples out of 22 and then hide, he did. He hid the data from people who would criticize it and actually tear it apart. Mark Steyn wants that to come out. One's pursuing the truth, the other seems to be hiding it. This is TNT climate and weather watchdog, meteorologist Joe Bastardi, asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
I didn't ask to be thrown in the streets with nowhere to go, but I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there for me.
1 in 10 young adults will experience a form of homelessness this year. For these kids who didn't ask to be put in this unthinkable situation, Covenant House is there, providing hot meals, a safe place to sleep, medical care, and love.
They just really genuinely just wanted to help me succeed, and I'm succeeding.
To learn more, go to safeplacetosleep.org today.
Navigating through the minefield of misinformation, intelligence operations, predictive programming. This is Connecting the Dots with Matt Ehret on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
All right, welcome back for the third segment of the second hour with Michel Chossudovsky. And we were just describing a little bit of the growth, the evolution of this absurdly insane imperial outlook that has sought to destroy Russia for over a century. Which is shaping the context and the tempo of everything else that we're seeing unfolding, especially what's going on in the Middle East, the attention to blow up Iran and other things, pretty much everything. So I think it's important to have that context, that framework in which to balance things out, and so hence the show Connecting the Dots. I got a question though, as you were talking earlier, and you mentioned this little-known, extremely important invasion of Russia after the 1917 revolution by this NATO-style invasion, which lasted for quite some time. I was thinking a little bit about what I heard Putin say when Putin, with Tucker Carlson, was going through a little bit of the history, the backdrop regarding the manipulation of artificial nationalist identities, the creation. Where does Ukraine as a current nation with its current boundaries, where does it come from? And he brought up how he said, I think he has his hypotheses, but he was like, for some reason, Lenin chose to provide for a sort of a type of constitution that would give a lot of liberty for these different parts of the Russian Empire, the former Russian Empire, to become breakaway nations effectively. And he kept on saying, for some reason, I don't know why he did that. Now, I wasn't thinking about the U.S. military invasion, broader West military invasion, but do you think that has something to do with what was maybe pressuring Lenin to do what he did when he did it in the early 20s?
Well, Lenin, first of all, understood that they had made some rather serious mistakes at the beginning. And again, they were still in a situation of war, and in different parts of the country. But then in the early 1920s, he initiated what was called the New Economic Policy.
Yeah.
And the New Economic Policy was essentially a form of, it was a mixed economy. They would be capitalist enterprises. And the irony is that they also had an exchange with Western countries. They were anxious to have, they had links with U.S. Enterprises and Western enterprises in Western Europe and so on. And I at that particular juncture, it up until his death in 1923, it was a project of a mixed economy in the wake of a major, well, it's not only World War I, it was also this war against the Soviet Union, which came to term about 2 years later, depending on the region, but it continued in southern Russia. It continued up until 1923, and so on. But I think what's important now, if we follow through on obviously Putin, there are certain issues Putin will not address, but I think that what is important from the standpoint of the United States and Western countries in general is the nuclear issue in a contemporary context. And I've been covering that for more than, for about 20 years. But I think that really what is very important is that in the wake of 9/11, the United States, in other words, the Bush administration, formulated what they call the Nuclear Posture Review. And essentially what they were putting forth was a doctrine of preemptive nuclear, it's preemptive nuclear doctrine, where the nuclear weapon becomes an instrument of self-defense. Now, it sounds absurd because this is a weapon of mass destruction. And then they said, well, these mini nukes, which explode underground, they're bunker buster bombs. They have a capacity between 1/3 and 12 times a Hiroshima bomb. Not negligible, but they're smaller They're the mini nukes. Now, in this nuclear posture review, they started to redefine, and they said there's a certain category of nuclear weapons which are, quote, safe for civilians because the explosion is underground. It's absolute rubbish and nonsense, okay? I checked the documents. It's 20 feet underground. It just goes up like that. And these bombs are, as I said, 1/3 to 6. They were 6 times, and some versions are 12 times. But the thing is that they say these bombs are harmless to civilians, and they've been recategorized as conventional weapons. And to that extent that it might be a 3-star general who will take it from the weapons toolbox. They use those terms, and it doesn't even, God forbid, it doesn't include Joe Biden's green light. But the thing is, what has occurred is, first of all, the politicians believed in their own propaganda. This is propaganda, but it's in the military manuals. Now, just to put it in simplified terms, your people who are viewing this program, many of them are smoking, right? Smoking cigarettes. Well, it is a bit like, yes, it's a bit like changing the label of the bomb. And instead of saying this bomb, this is a peacemaking bomb, good for your health. Yeah, it's a bit like saying you have a pack of cigarettes on the back and which says smoking is detrimental, can cause cancer. Well, then you change the label and say smoking is good for your health. That's what they did with the mini nukes. And
so what time frame was this brought into the strategic doctrine of the United States and the broader NATO West?
Well,
limited thermonuclear war being something workable that we should factor into our calculus. Like when did that become well,
I mean, the thing is that during the Cold War, there was this notion of mutually assured destruction. Yeah. They called it the MAD doctrine, but it was mad. It was less mad than what we've got now. Mutually assured destruction was the recognition by the Soviet Union and by the United States and also the other nuclear powers. Of course, Israel is a nuclear state. Okay, it has a very advanced weapons system, and that's why this is very scary. So the mutually assured destruction was the doctrine, and deterrence was the doctrine. And then what happened after the Cold War was over, a new doctrine developed, and it is the preemptive. So that and the preemptive means that you might even use a nuclear weapon on a first strike basis to prevent you from being attacked. Now, this is where the absurdity comes in, and that's where the military-industrial complex comes in. A few years later, and it started under Obama. Obama is the most dangerous president they've had in the United States. He initiated a nuclear weapons program, which was initially $1 trillion. It's gone up to 1.3 trillion under well, that was even under Trump and now under Biden, and it is slated to be $2 trillion by 2030. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of money assigned to producing preemptive nuclear bombs, which in effect are totally dysfunctional. The only thing that is well, they're dangerous, that's clear, but they don't involve any kind of advancement in nuclear technology, and they're used as a essentially they're used to fill the pockets of the military-industrial complex. Yeah. Because there you've got $1 trillion and say, let's go ahead with it. now, hopefully for the producers of these bombs, they'll get their money before they're used. But I'm sorry for being cynical, but the thing is, they believe Hillary Clinton is on record when she was candidate for the presidency. She said nuclear weapons are on the table. Nuclear weapons are on the table. That means we contemplate their use, but we're contemplating their use to defend ourselves as self-defense, preemptive. And we can use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states as well. So let's say if Iran attacks us in the Red Sea, we can use nuclear weapons on a preemptive basis against Iran, and that kind of argument is ongoing. So
yeah, and it's kind of scary too, the way that they're trying to blur the language to confuse people who are listening or consuming Western media and analysts to think that, okay, Iran is also Iran proxies, and then they redefine and they say, oh, but Hezbollah, that's an Iran proxy, so it's kind of like Iran, or the Houthis, that's like Iran, and so they're sort of blurring the line of like, well, what is Iran? At what point, where's the red line over what is yeah, anyway, sorry.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think what is ongoing is sort of a multiplicity of potential false flags. Okay.
Yes.
They'll say the Syrians are attacking us, the Hezbollah is attacking us, and the Houthis are attacking us, and now we need to bring in a few more naval vessels into the picture. So that we can defend ourselves and defend Israel, okay? And Israel is being attacked by the Palestinians. So that there's a whole load of statements which don't make sense. These are countries with limited. I'm not talking about Iran, but let's say Hezbollah is a movement in Lebanon, and the Houthis are in Yemen, and so on. Now, there's also another aspect which is very, very crucial. It's the control over long-distance maritime trade. Okay, so clearly the Red Sea is absolutely strategic, and so is, of course, the Suez Canal. And now they're forcing the Chinese to go around Africa. And so that this, in a sense, this war theater in the Middle East is also tied up into the threats directed against China. China's in a sense, well, in a nutshell, China is a very complex type of relationship to the United States, because in the sphere of production and trade, they are allies. You've got thousands of US companies that are there. You have contracting arrangements, and everything that we consume in the West comes from China, okay? Well, I exaggerate, but I mean consumer goods. So if they are to wage a war on China, from a military standpoint, this is going to literally undermine the whole structure of trade and consumption throughout the world. I think people who go to the supermarket, to the shopping malls, are familiar that practically all the things that they buy on a weekly basis comes from China, and then the whole issue of long distance trade is affected by what's going on. So that's another dimension. And China is not a communist country. It's a full-fledged capitalist country. I've been going to China for the last 30 years, and I understand very clearly that this is this is a country which had an alliance with the United States, and now that alliance is in crisis because the Chinese have advanced tremendously in terms of advanced technology, and they also have an alliance with Russia. So there we are. That is the nature of the geopolitical context which is unfolding.
Yeah, no, that's extremely important, and it's almost a joke to when you listen to a lot of the McCarthyite revival that's going on right now, trying to portray China as this commie, authoritarian caricature, and a lot of Americans are buying this up. It's such a contrast to like actually looking at the malls, the TV, the media, everything else in China. It's so similar to the West. That being said, Michel Chossudovsky, you have been amazing. Thank you so much. Globalresearch.ca, fantastic resource. Everybody should use this. And I'm looking forward to future conversations with you. Thank you so much.